Hi, it's Dennis Daly. I've posted over 100 excerpts from some of my more than 250 American montage shows that I did in the 1980s and 90s while at UPI Radio. Recently, I embarked on a fresh series of shows. My special guest is ADAM-MICHAELL James, who's written a wonderful 611-page book called The Bewitched Continuum that tells you everything you ever wanted to know about that classic TV series. Before going on the air, I asked what I should call you, Adam, Michael. You said to call you Mike or Michael. Michael, I've seen hyphenated last names. How did you get a hyphenated first name?
Invention. Well, my real last name has always been a little complicated for people. So when they almost tripped over it during my high school graduation, I decided I needed something a little bit more simple. So that was when I kind of lopped off my last name, threw Adam at the beginning, and decided the hyphen would be very stylish. Mm-hmm. As it turns out, the hyphen has confused about as many people as my real last name, so you just can't win with it.
I must tell you, for someone who wears a bow tie, this classy first name fits.
Oh, good.
Trust me, everything's fine. My last name is Daly, and, you know, it's funny, Dennis Daly, everybody says, well, what's your real name? And I go, well, no, that is my real name.
Not bad. You were born with a radio name.
Yeah, so I had to go into broadcasting. Yeah. But I remember one time I won an award, and it's engraved to Dennis Bailey.
Wow.
Yeah, so, you know, you can't win, no matter what your name is.
Always open to interpretation.
Somebody messes it up. Michael, let's go back to the beginning. Before you wrote this amazing book about the show Bewitched, and I'll riffle through it, it reminds me of when my dad worked for Montgomery Ward. This is what their catalog
Montgomery Ward
like.
catalog, yeah.
But where are you from originally?
Originally, I'm from Fairbanks, Alaska.
Oh, really?
Yes. And no, we don't live in igloos up there. Just my neighbors did. No, just kidding.
I've been to Anchorage, but not to Fairbanks.
I've actually been to Anchorage a couple of times. But
you're not old enough to remember this, but did you have family who talked about the earthquake?
No.
Really?
No.
They wanted to wipe the memory away, I guess.
Well, the thing was, my family's not from there originally anyway. My dad was in the airlines back in the 60s, and so they kind of moved around a lot even before we were born, and that was how we ended up in Alaska. And then my mom got tired of the snow, so we moved to Hawaii.
Oh, my God, what a change.
And I never hit the lower 48 until I was like 13.
Where did you live in Hawaii?
Hawaii Kai. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's on Oahu on the eastern side.
Eastern, okay. When I took the bus around, I would have passed it on the way to the Polynesian Village.
Oh, my God,
on that
yes,
side,
the
right?
Polynesian Cultural Center. I remember that.
I had been to 49 states, not Hawaii. Now, you'd think I would have been to Hawaii, but I had not been to Hawaii.
That's a tough one.
And my best friend from D.C. anchors morning news out there. And you have not lived there recently.
No, not since the early 80s.
Well, Howard invited me out, and he said, if you can get here, we'll put you up. I thought, I can't pass this up. So I spent 5 days there, and instead of renting a car, I took the bus, which is the island-wide bus system.
That's right. That's what it's called.
It's called the bus. And I went all over the place by bus, and I do a lot of home videos. I went to all the necessary places, but I went to a lot of odd coastal points and places people don't know about. So when you were in grade school, high school, were you an outgoing person? Because I must tell everybody, you have a very theatrical, overly friendly look about you, but it doesn't look artificial.
Oh, well, that's good. That's good. Was I outgoing? No, not really. Because when you move around a lot like I did, you're always the new kid somewhere, and
which can be good and bad.
Right. Yeah. So you don't get a reputation, but also you're constantly having to meet people over and over again. And so I did keep to myself quite a bit. It's funny that you mentioned theatricality, though, because one of the high schools, the high school I graduated from, actually, I took a drama class, and my drama teacher saw me kind of sitting there, kind of, withdrawn into myself, and I guess she saw something, because she took me and she started sending me off on drama competitions and things like that, and that's kind of what got me out of myself and kind of helped me hone this theatricality.
I have a good friend here in Palm Springs who was a very successful background actor. I'm not sure the phrase for it, but it's a recurring character who never has a speaking part. He's always at the bar, he's always at the hairdressers or whatever. So you get used to looking at that person, but they're never identified. He, like a lot of people in Hollywood, has had his career fall apart because of drugs. Been off for a decade, moved to Palm Springs to further dry out. So he's getting his feet wet again, and he went there for a shoot, and the director just yelled and screamed at him. He said, you know, you're detracting from the star. Don't move around so much. He said, well, I'm a hyper kind of person. And the director said, not here. You're not. And he accused him of being on drugs. And it really aggravated him because he's worked for more than a decade to get off drugs.
Right.
And the first photo shoot he has. I said, well, probably the director was. You know, that's...
It could be. No, it's funny you mention that because I've done a lot of background acting as well. And I got yelled at once for looking at my watch when I was walking by. You're distracting from the action. Really? I'm looking at my watch. But, you know, it's how they see it through their viewfinder.
It's that mindset of the director that I have to showcase the star.
Yeah.
You know, nothing moves in the background. So you finally came out of your shell.
I did.
How old were you when you first did something that you thought, you know, I can do this?
I think 16. From the same drama teacher who, by that point, she, you know, wanted me to be in the school play. We did You Can't Take It With You. And I was Grandpa.
Oh.
So I had to talk like this for 2 hours, and apparently, I don't know if this is true or not, but I was told that somebody came up to my drama teacher and asked her where they got a 75-year-old man to be in a high school play. That's what I was told.
What a compliment. You know, I remember interviewing Captain Kangaroo once, and he was telling me that when he first started doing the show, he was 27 or 30, you know, something, and he had to put on the grandfatherly Captain Kangaroo, and he said as he got older, he used less and less makeup. And finally, he was older than the character.
Oh, my God, the Captain Kangaroo, boy, that's taking me back.
What a nice guy. Have you ever heard of Howdy Doody?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Clarabelle the Clown, the original Clarabelle, was Captain Kangaroo.
Oh, okay.
Bob Keeshan.
That's his name.
And they had a little dispute as to whether the characters would be allowed, say, to appear at a supermarket or whatever, and they all quit. And they got in the whole new cast. So, at the very end of the last episode, where Clarabelle speaks, it's not Bob Keeshan. In the last episode, after something like 2,000 Howdy Doodies, you know, they're talking about, and Clarabelle comes up and honks his horn, and he makes a motion to Buffalo Bob that he wants to say something, and Buffalo Bob is just amazed. So finally, at the very last second of the last show, the camera, I'm going to cry, the camera comes in, and Clarabelle looks at the kids and says, goodbye, kids.
Aww.
Yeah, I mean, it's a wonderful...
That's a great wrap-up. Yeah.
So you finally find out you can act. Did you then do that in college, or did it just serve as a catalyst to open you up?
I think it was a little of both. I didn't actually go to college. I wanted to... I was more interested in music at the time, so I tried to get into it. Well, I did get into radio. I went to broadcasting school. I got my FCC license. That led to working at a small country station in Fort Pierce, Florida, you know, where I had to lower my voice an octave. And
hey, listen, like there's not enough testosterone in America to make me sound like a bass.
Exactly.
I have such an Irish tenor voice. So, Florida, now were you knocking around there because your parents were moving again?
Yeah, well, I had a stepfather at that point, and we had left L.A., or we moved from Hawaii to L.A. in the early 80s, and then moved to Florida from there. And when I was old enough to finally decide where I wanted to be, I came back here to Southern California, where I spent most of my adult life until 7 years ago, when I moved to Prince Edward Island, Canada. And people always say, isn't that quite a shift from L.A. to Prince Edward Island, Canada? Charlottetown, very good.
Is the capital of the province.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I never got there. I got to Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, drove the car around the outside of Nova Scotia.
Sure.
Oh, boy. So what did you do there?
Aside from...
Did you play a grandfather?
I played a couple of things. No, actually, I co-wrote a musical about one of Canada's best-known authors, L.M. Montgomery. You may or may not know of her. She wrote Anne of Green Gables.
Oh, okay.
And so we moved up there to start doing that. I wrote the book and lyrics. My partner wrote the music. And so we wrote a show about L.M. Montgomery's life called The 9 Lives of L.M. Montgomery. And in that, her fictional characters, because she wrote other characters besides Anne, which a lot of people somehow don't realize, So all her fictional characters come to life, and they kind of interact with her and, guide her through her kind of difficult, increasingly difficult existence, through the highs and lows. Being an American, I did not know much about Canada, let alone Anne of Green Gables, let alone L.M. Montgomery. You mentioned that to a lot of people here.
Yeah, you don't want to look stupid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I had to kind of research L.M. Montgomery, or Maud as we call her, from the scratch, which worked out well because, I didn't have any preconceived notions of who she was or what she did. And so that became interesting, was much more interesting than adapting one of her books and doing that as a musical, because nobody had done anything about her life yet. It was just a matter of getting 60 years worth of stuff and getting it down into an appreciable length, because for some reason you can have a movie like Lord of the Rings that's 3.5 hours and nobody complains, but when it's theater, they're getting out the tomatoes.
So, boy, I joke that I'm writing the musical version of Ben-Hur, which is what I'm working on.
How do you
right
get the
now.
horses on stage?
Well, that's a problem. One of the lyrics is, it's, hey, hey, your mother and sister aren't dead. I told you that just to muddle your head. They're as live as two bell peppers living out their life as lepers. Hey, hey, your mother and sister aren't dead. Unfortunately, even though I've got a piano here, I don't really play that well. Yeah. I don't compose, I can play. Did people see this epic?
They did. They did. We did it, I want to say 2 quote-unquote seasons, because it was really just 6 weeks, in 2008. And then it got reinvented quite a bit, because, once you get it up on stage, it's a whole different animal, and you see the things that work and that don't work. So it was reshaped a little bit, and we did it again in 2009. Well,
the great story about reshaping is Hello, Dolly, which you would think is just whole cloth wonderful when you go to see it. It wasn't doing well about 2/3 of the way through, and they asked Jerry Herman to write a new song. So he took the scene where Dolly talks to her dead husband and talks about how she's going to start her life over again, just as there's a parade. And he wrote Before the Parade, which became one of the big songs. Then they took it into Broadway, and it was fine, but it just needed not a tweak. It needed a really big tweak right there. But you wonder how many musicals in particular. I mean, even Showboat, they've messed around with.
It's a process. And the thing about it is, when you write a movie and you film it, it's out there. When you write a book, you publish it, generally it's out there. When you write a show, it can be tweaked forever and ever and ever. Amen. And that gets very tiring after a while.
What was opening night like?
Surreal. It was very surreal.
Was it in slow motion?
I think it kind of was. There is a pinnacle in Act 1 where Maud gets Anne of Green Gables published, and Anne is at her side, and the song is called An Epic in My Life, because that's actually the phrase that was in Maud's journal from that experience. And so I was standing in the wings. I always ended up in the show, because for some reason in Prince Edward Island we can't get enough guys, so I always ended up in the show as well, which didn't bother me. So I was standing in the wings watching Maud and Anne singing this song, and also too, we fought really hard to get the show open on the exact 100th anniversary of the publication of Anne of Green Gables.
Oh, wow.
Which was
That's a little bit of pressure.
That was heaven and earth moving right there. And so standing in the wings, watching them singing about Maud's epic on the same day that it was ours, it was, that was very heady.
Good Lord. How did you get backing for it? Did you have trouble finding a producer?
Well,
did you max out your credit card?
A little of both. Prince Edward Island's not exactly Broadway.
No.
So, they don't have theatrical producers in the same sense. So a lot of that kind of thing, you do kind of have to...
I would think it would be hard enough to have gotten it produced in Halifax.
Yeah. It's tricky. It's tricky. Actually, after I leave here, tomorrow, I'm going to New York on the way back to Prince Edward Island to look into theatrical producers, because it's one thing to write a show and it's another thing to do all that heavy lifting, which is kind of not our area. It's not our forte. So I would like to find somebody whose forte it is.
I have a casual friend whose name I borrowed for one of my characters and added an extra T in the name so he wouldn't sue me, who produced 2 movies. He produced Runaway Train and the sequel to the Peter Bogdanovich Texas movie, thinking the last movie in
Why
whatever that was. But anyway,
so familiar to me?
And I thought, oh, he'd be a great interviewer, and everything. And I found out that when I got to the point to talk about his producing the movie, he said, you don't understand. All I had to do was spend 24 hours a day for a year begging for money. There's no glamour. There's no glamour in this at all. And my heart sank. I thought, Bob, this would be really fun to talk about. And he was all just talking about lawyers and missed deadlines and threatening people.
Yeah, not too far off, actually.
Wow. So you end up back here in California.
Temporarily, yes. I knew, well, when I started working on the book last year, I've been a big fan of Bewitched since I was 8 years old.
Now, about how old are you?
45.
Oh, really? Mm-hmm. I'm not asking for a date, but you don't look it.
Thank you.
Oh, you're absolutely welcome.
Nobody but your hairdresser knows.
Well, I tell everybody mine's dyed, and it doesn't help any. What I was thinking about the fact, picturing you as being a decade younger, I was thinking, how the heck do you know about Bewitched? But it was a part of your childhood.
Oh, in its original run, no, although I was born during the original run of the series. I was too young to know about it. Later on, they were running it in syndication in the afternoons, like they always ran the Munsters and Addams Family and Gilligan's Island, all the 60s shows. I don't know exactly why I was sitting in front of the TV that day, because I wasn't a big TV watcher back then. And I saw this blonde woman, and there's this guy hitting on her, and she zaps up this bucket of water and dumps it on his head, and does her little twitch motion. I was transfixed from that moment.
Yeah, there's a little bit of slapstick in Bewitched, isn't there? Without really, pardon the pun, hitting you over the head.
Right. It is there, yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
it's a lot of the sight gags and things like that.
Well, now there's some funny parallels there. You had the Addams Family and the Munsters, just both coming from out of nowhere on separate networks. Mm-hmm. You had Bewitched and I Dream of Jeannie coming from out of nowhere on separate networks. How did that happen? Do you know?
The same way it happens with Hollywood movies. I mean, in the case of Bewitched and Jeannie, Bewitched was first, and it was very successful in its first season. So, of course, NBC, decided they wanted to have something along the same lines. So instead of a witch with a twitch, they made it a genie who could blink, and then came out with that. Nice try. I saw it.
What you don't know at home is I was trying to do my face that way, and it just didn't work.
The twitch.
Yeah.
It's a lot of practice. But so that's how that. But it's the same thing with movies. It's like when you have one thing that's successful, inevitably you have 10 copycat projects that come out
and
to
television.
Bank on that.
When I was a kid, the first major shows they did were westerns. They did that for the same reason the first movies in the teens were westerns. Fewer sets, film it outside, bright daylight, it's good for the film, and you can use the same rock formation every week, the bad guy. Then it went to medical shows.
Oh, yes.
And then cop shows. But, you're very right there. Things not only go in cycles, they become clonified all of a sudden.
Definitely. And that was the case there, and it will continue to be the case probably however long there are movies and television and radio and you name it.
How did you decide you wanted to spend what must have been an enormous amount of time writing about Bewitched?
Well, here's the thing. Going back to where I was talking about, I've loved the show since I was 8, so my dad taught me how to record it on cassette tapes. And then taught me how to fix the cassette tapes so I wouldn't keep going to him, Dad, it's broken. And that evolved into VHS tapes, and then, of course, the DVDs came out. And since then, as an adult, I have come to learn a lot about continuity. It started with this one book by Phil Farrand. He wrote The Nitpicker's Guide to Next Generation Trekkers, where he would pick apart Star Trek The Next Generation and say, well, you notice that Tasha Yar is waving in the turbo lift at the camera, when she's not supposed to. And those kind of details fascinated me. But that's the kind of thing that I started to notice. And about 5 years ago, I started writing opinion columns for SoapCentral.com. Every couple of weeks, I watch episodes and I write about the bold and the beautiful. And I became even more acutely aware of continuity. And how things flowed together from week to week, or wait a minute, 6 months ago they had this character doing this, so there's no way this character would be doing that now.
Well, you bring up something in the book in that Darren's favorite food changed 3 times in 1 year.
Yes, it did.
Now, I can see that years ago. I can see that in the golden days of radio where they were cranking out 39 completely new episodes a year, doing them live, or even in early television. I think they say that Lucy and Ricky had 11 different addresses they gave. There was not, is there in just about everything now a continuity person?
I think so, and I think that
there almost have to be.
I think continuity now is because we have social media, because we have DVDs with special features, because we can watch the things over and over and pick them apart. I think you have to have a continuity person, like shows like Big Bang Theory, Modern Family. There's a definite solid connective thread. But as you were saying, in the days of Bewitched, they were having to do 30, 36, 39 episodes a season. They were on time crunches. There were budgetary constraints, so things were going to go wrong. And plus, people watched the episode once a year on a little 13-inch screen, and maybe it reran during the summer, and maybe it didn't, depending on the cycle. And so they knew that there were certain things they didn't have to concentrate on because of that. So it's not saying that they're wrong. It's just saying that now looking at it under the continuity lens,
they had other fish to fry.
Exactly.
Trying to get the shows out.
Exactly.
You're right about us hearing them now. For example, one of my favorite radio shows was called Yours Truly, Johnny Dollar. Ran for 20 years with 6 different stars. For 2.5 years, instead of being a half-hour once-a-week show, it was a nightly 15-minute show. So they had time to flesh out the characters. Now, if you listen to all 5 in a row, not waiting till tomorrow for the next part, you will realize that the same actor who played the sheriff on Monday was a policeman on Wednesday.
Exactly.
But you're absolutely right. If you're listening to them 1 week at a time or 24 hours later, but that's a bad thing about us being able to watch 11 Supermans in one night,
Well, it's bad, but it's interesting, too, because, one of the things I make very clear in the book is that even though I do nitpick things, and I also want to say I do mention many of the good things, because you have to, and there are so many good
You're
things.
Very even-handed.
I tried to be, because I don't want to just be picking things apart. I know that's kind of the society that we live in, but there were so many wonderful things about the show and its continuity as well that I wanted to even things out. But I'm very clear that it's always meant to be respectful, that you have to think of it in a historical context, and that these are the conditions that they were doing this show under every week, and it wasn't meant to necessarily be lined up back to back the way I do. It's just that it's fascinating under that microscope to do that now and look at how things shape up.
In the interviews you've done so far, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I would assume there are an awful lot of interviewers who are kind of on the other end of the spectrum than I am, who would have asked about intrigue, asked about why Dick York really left. Are you getting a lot of questions of areas you really don't want to get into?
Not so much about not wanting to get into it. And you're right, I have actually been asked a lot more about the behind-the-scenes thing. But the thing is, my book concentrates on the fictional aspects of the show. The only time I reference real life is if it somehow affects that continuity. For example, in between 6th and 7th season, there was a fire at Sunset Gower Studios. It destroyed most of the Stevens kitchen set. So they had to rebuild it. So they sent everybody to Salem to film, location episodes there, and so they would have time to rebuild the set. So they come back at the top of 7th season. The entire house has gotten an upgrade, and Endora just walks in and is like, "Oh, I love the carpet," But that's the only reference. And suddenly Larry and Darren's offices are different, but nobody ever says why.
No. There's a great private joke in a radio show called The Great Gildersleeve, which was the first spin-off. My favorite radio show was Fibber McGee and Molly, which ran from the 30s to the 60s.
Oh, I didn't realize it ran to the 60s.
Yeah, as vignettes on the weekend on NBC. But they had a neighbor that they brought in, played by Hal Perry, Gildersleeve. And they had used the name Gildersleeve a lot earlier. That's something else you noticed. There was a dentist named Gildersleeve. They just liked that. But it was spun off, and he got his own show. Well, in the 7th season, it's interesting, 6th and 7th season, Hal Perry left thinking he could be a bigger star on his own and flopped. And they brought in a guy named Willard Waterman. Now, Waterman did a lot of radio, and he and Hal Perry both grew up together in Chicago, and they sounded alike.
Oh.
So for most listeners, they did not know there was a different actor, except in 3 places in that first show with Willard Waterman, who supposedly as Gildersleeve had been away for the summer. They say, there's something different about you. And in one case, the nephew says, Unc, you don't look the same. And I thought, they were really having fun with this, and people at home didn't know.
Exactly.
My special guest is Adam, oh no.
Welcome to my world.
Yeah, ADAM-MICHAEL James, who wants me to call him Mike, who's written a fabulous book, which weighs about 48 pounds. It's called The Bewitched Continuum, and it's about the classic TV series. Before we get into what you want to talk about in the book, I need to ask about Agnes Moorehead. Agnes Moorehead was the queen of radio. Some of the most phenomenal shows ever done, including the original Sorry, Wrong Number, were with Agnes Moorehead. Do you have any stories about her or any feedback you've gotten about what she was like? Because in many ways, she stole most of the episodes she was in.
That's true, she did. Yeah. I think that, I've seen a lot of her old films. But her classic films. Mm-hmm. And she kind of always comes across very kind of stern and yet in Bewitched, she had this very impish glee when she played Endora that leads me to believe that she enjoyed it a lot more than she probably let on. I haven't heard too much of the behind-the-scenes things. I think there are some wonderful books out there that deal exclusively with the behind-the-scenes things, and I've always been more interested in the fictional parts. But I think that she was probably as formidable in real life as we imagine her to be, but she was also extremely talented, and Endora just got zanier and zanier as the show went on, and she went with it, and we remember her for that.
Well, the other thing is that, I don't know whether you noticed this or not, one of her pet names for Darren was Darwin.
Yes.
And Dick York played the Scopes character in the Monkey Trial movie Inherit the Wind, right, which was about Darwin.
Yes.
And the first time I heard her call him Darwin, I thought, are they thinking about this?
You never know. You never know. I know that she also called him Darwin in an episode where Aunt Clara had turned him into a chimpanzee by mistake. Oh. But they never really drew that parallel. I thought it was kind of funny. Yeah.
That, the thing about Agnes Moorehead is last month, it was when I was in Hawaii, I got a copy of the first episode of the CBS Radio Mystery Theater, which was an hour-long drama series in the 70s, ran for 8 years, brand new writings, and there's this elderly woman named Ida Canby who takes in a boarder who has a horrible cough. And in one part of it, you hear the guy yelling, Mrs. Canby, help! And I thought, boy, the woman who's playing, who is it? Is it Jeanette Noland? And I realized it was Agnes Moorehead, a month before she died, doing another voice.
Nice.
And everything she did was Agnes Moorehead.
Yeah,
and she had this wonderful granny voice she did. And I was so impressed. Then when I found out she died a month later, I'm thinking, boy, the adrenaline must have helped her.
But she had a good parrot voice, too. There was one episode where, I think it's the episode that Uncle Arthur is introduced, and they're trying to play a trick on him to get him to stop playing practical jokes. So she leads Arthur to believe that he has permanently turned her into a parrot. But it's Agnes Moorehead doing the voice of the parrot, and it's very convincing. And I always thought every time they gave her something to do that wasn't just Endora, that was a little bit outside of that, she always shone, always.
Well, I mentioned Sorry, Wrong Number. I don't know whether you've ever seen the movie or heard the radio drama.
I'm sure I've seen the movie. It's been a while back.
For those who don't know, it's about a woman who's confined to her bed who overhears a conversation on the phone about these two guys. They were having telephone problems, who were going to kill this bedfast woman. And she finally, from what they said, puts 2 and 2 together and realizes her husband is paying them to kill her. And she tries to get help, and she calls the police, and she calls her friends. And finally, at the very end, she's screaming and yelling so frantically, she nearly passed out. And it's live, of course, on radio from the exhaustion of it. But and Hans Conried, the great actor, was in it. She was on the phone with the police when they strangle her. And finally, after they strangle her, you hear an elevated train go past, and you hear somebody going, oh, He picks up the phone and he said, "This is the police. Do you need something?" And Hans Conried says, "Sorry, wrong number."
Title card.
A title card hangs up there. The depth of casting on that show was wonderful. My other favorite radio person, John Daner. I can't remember which character he played, but he was in there occasionally. What's the most startling thing or most interesting thing you found about Bewitched in researching all of this?
Just how things fit together or don't fit together. When you're watching the episodes, they're generally self-contained. We're watching them out of order, especially now when they're on television. And I had watched them in order before, but I'd never really sat down with it and analyzed it. So doing the book kind of helped me rediscover my favorite show.
Yeah, it lists every episode.
All 254 episodes.
Plot summations, good parts, bad parts, your observations.
Mm-hmm.
And you were talking about continuity.
Yes.
The one involving Christmas, Santa Claus, and an orphanage.
Oh, yeah.
Can you tell? There's something screwy about how they put that together.
Oh,
isn't there? In a year later, they go back, but the flashback doesn't work or something?
Right. The episode was called "The Vision of Sugar Plums." And, the Stevens and the Kravitzes brought orphans from the local orphanage home to spend the holidays. Samantha teaches her orphan guest, who's very disillusioned and about Christmas and all that. She takes him to the North Pole, and they meet Santa Claus, and he sees the light, and it's wonderful. A year later, and I'm guessing that this was because Elizabeth Montgomery was pregnant at the time, and they probably needed to give her time for maternity leave.
They needed a shortcut show.
They needed a shortcut show, which is understandable. And so they revisit A Vision of Sugar Plums. They recut it, but they add a new beginning where Samantha's hair is 6 inches longer. She's visibly pregnant. And then there are things that they mention that if you take all the episodes before that and line those up and make sense out of that, suddenly it doesn't make sense. Like, wait a minute, Darren can't have these memories because Samantha put a spell on him to make him forget his visit to the North Pole, so he shouldn't be remembering this kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that in order to rebuild the set, they got them out of the studio.
Right.
They sent them somewhere else. Do you think in the spectrum of television, Bewitched was a good show, a great show? Was it better than average? Are there more pluses than flaws in it?
Absolutely more pluses than flaws. I mean, yes, I go into great length.
Start that again.
Oh, sure. Yes, definitely. I think that despite the fact that I go into, these walls were blue in the last episode and they're not now, it's never meant to be disparaging. Overall, Bewitched was a very intelligently written show. The characters were overall very consistent. The performances were excellent. And compare it to I Dream of Jeannie, for example, and no disrespect, but that show's a lot campier and sillier. Bewitched, even when they were campy and silly, still kind of maintained this level of dignity and like I said, intelligence.
Well, and I thought the chemistry between Samantha and both of the actors who played the husband, I thought that chemistry was very good, because if this had been real life, it would have put Darren in an incredibly difficult position. Not only dealing with a wife who had supernatural powers, but one who was out of control sometimes, who had family members who wanted to sabotage everything he did.
At every turn.
And both of those actors didn't play it broadly. I mean, it could have been a soap opera that just happened to have that kind of twist to it.
Exactly. And the fact that Samantha felt so natural with Dick York's Darren and then turned around and was that same natural with Dick Sargent's Darren is a testament to her acting ability and to the way the show was written, because the character was consistent. I've
seen so many interviews with Dick York where he wasn't quite bitter, but I trust the fact that it was back problems.
That's what it was.
There was one episode, I think he fell or something fell on him, or he was...
Well, you're close. He had done a movie in 1959 called They Came to Cordura, and if I remember it right, he and his fellow actors and their characters had to lift up this train facade, and it backed up on them and fell, and he hurt his back doing that. And so before he even started Bewitched, he had, this slew of back problems. And he took the show and he did it anyway. But as the show went on, it became more difficult for him so Darren's lying down a lot, he's sitting down a lot. And eventually they had to write him out of episodes because he couldn't do it. And so he reached a point where he just said, I don't want to leave the show, but I have to.
Yeah.
And that was when they brought Dick Sargent in.
And that must have been humiliating for him in a way, because he was so associated with that part. And from what he said in the interviews I saw, he looked forward, except for his discomforts, to going to work every day.
Oh, yeah.
And not everybody has that luxury.
That's absolutely true. And no, I think they all loved coming in and being witches or mortals affected by witches for, several hours a day. And I think their enjoyment is the reason that we enjoy the show, because it translated to the screen.
Don't you wonder, if it were done today, how much better the special effects would be?
Well, that is true.
They're fun to watch, though, and it's still very difficult to create that now the person's in the scene and now they're not. In the old days, it was.
Right,
yeah.
Before CGI. Everything was practical effects. And in that respect, you respect them even more for the fact that they had to do everything manually. Now, yes, the effects would be wonderful. They might be too wonderful. And I don't know, I keep hearing they're talking about doing a remake. And that was my reaction. And I don't know how that would be done. I think if you were to bring it back, you would have to bring Tabitha and Adam and visit them today.
Yeah.
And kind of harken back to their parents, who are no longer here.
You don't know Dick Van Dyke, do you?
Not personally.
I still think there's time to do a sequel to Mary Poppins.
Oh, I bet.
And I've even got the plot ready.
He would do it. He would totally do that.
There was a movie in '42 called I Married a Witch.
Yes.
And a show, Bell, Book, and Candle, a movie called that. Did you get it all into the fact that these are kind of the parents in a way?
Yeah, a little bit. I did see both of them. I seem to recall that I didn't care for Bell, Book, and Candle. I don't remember exactly why. But there was, I think, and I have the same problem with Harry Potter, because when you grow up on the witch world of Bewitched, they have certain ways that they carry themselves, their powers have certain capabilities, and then when you see another witch scenario, you're always going, but that's wrong. It's not wrong.
Well, it's like Dorothy trying to tell Glinda, you can't be a witch, you're too pretty.
Yeah. So, I mean, they're not wrong, they're just different. Mm-hmm. So I think when I watched Bell, Book, and Candle, I still had the kind of the Bewitched definition of witchcraft in my head, and then I'm looking at Bell, Book, and Candle going, that's not right.
Well, there's kind of a tribute, because the cityscape in part of I Married a Witch is kind of parts of the credits.
That's true.
That's
true.
Bewitched.
I'm sure there are definite
I think the art
there.
department paid tribute.
Oh, I think they
must
have. I think they definitely must have. And the fact that the show didn't take place in Westport right away. That didn't actually happen until 6th season. But in doing my research for this, because there would be things that come up, and I'm like, well, I'm a little vague on this. Let me look it up on Wikipedia, which is what we do now. But I'm sure there's a movie called The Man in the Gray Flannel Suit.
Oh, yes.
About, a gentleman who's in advertising, and it takes place in Westport, Connecticut. And I thought, oh, maybe that's why they moved it.
You're somewhat of a musician.
A little bit. I tinker.
Watch The Man in the Gray Flannel Suit, the last minute, because Gregory Peck is in the office with the lawyer's Charles Bickford, is it? Anyway, he and Jennifer Jones walk out, get in the car, and Gregory Peck says, I don't know whether I've told you this, but I worship you. Now, Bernard Herrmann, who did the music, was given the awful task of finishing the movie in about 20 seconds.
Oh.
So what do you write for 20 seconds? There hasn't been any music for 40 minutes in this. And he writes this piece. He was a nut on violin.
Oh, yes.
Because if you think of Psycho...
Exactly.
He writes this piece where it goes... and then the violins go up for a note that you don't think they can hit. It's so high that the violinist practically has his hand on his neck. And the movie, da-dum, and you go, as a musician, you go, my God, that was breathtaking. So the thing about Man in the Gray Flannel Suit I remember most, in addition to the way Gregory Peck spoke, was the last minute.
Oh, well, something like that you're not
so
going to forget.
rent it and watch it sometime.
Oh, yeah, I definitely would like to.
Here's something you did I thought was neat. You get into the plots, and you get into, as you say, not the personalities, but the nitty-gritty of the shows themselves, but you also have a best and worst list of the episode.
Yes, I do.
Which one was the worst?
To me,
to you,
and this is only to me, there was an episode called Soapbox Derby, and it was in third season. And Samantha helps this 12-year-old boy who is, he wants to be in this derby, and his father's a mechanic, and he's always busy, and he doesn't have time. So she tries to help him, and of course, he wins the race, and everything's all wonderful. But to me, it was a little bit too Wonderful World of Disney.
Oh,
it just didn't feel.
Was she moving wrenches without putting her hand on them or something? There was
one point where she tried to help the father by zapping the tires and floating them onto the car, which was a wonderful effect.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, she helps the kid by fixing his wobbly wheel, by twitching that so it's straight. But to me, that just it's not a bad episode, but to me, it just doesn't kind of fit the overall tone of the series.
It almost sounds as if it was one of those episodes that was written by a fan.
It could have been.
Because a lot of it would have been away from the house.
Yeah, it was.
And that feels uncomfortable sometimes when the set changes.
Sure. There was another episode where they spend 2/3 of it on a golf course, and it was kind of that same feeling.
Cutesy lets you use special effects
or just not being in comfortable or familiar surroundings.
Well, they said that about the first Mission Impossible movie. It was too special effects in search of a plot.
Well, yeah, you can say that about a lot of things these days.
look at I Love Lucy, how comfortable that living room was.
Sure.
You're right. You take the show on the road, you got problems sometimes.
Sometimes.
What's your favorite episode?
My favorite episode... well, there's the episode I saw for the first time, but I think my favorite episode is one that came in 7th season. It's called Sisters at Heart. And it was written, or inspired at least, by a 10th grade English class in Los Angeles, and they took that idea and turned it into a teleplay. And in it, Tabitha, Samantha's daughter, has an African-American best friend who's come to spend the night. And it turns into this exploration of racism and desegregation and equality. And because one of Darren's clients comes to the door and thinks that her friend Lisa, the African-American girl, is the product of a mixed marriage, and cuts Darren off the account and doesn't want that. And so when Samantha finds that out and he comes over, she kind of twitches him into seeing everybody else as black, including himself when he looks in the mirror. And it kind of gives him a wake-up call to his kind of latent racism. And that was a powerful message.
This is almost a Rod Serling script,
yeah, a little bit, yeah. But I mean, it was a sitcom in the late 60s, early 70s. A lot of those shows were just kind of, there for entertainment. Now, Bewitched was there for entertainment too, but whenever they could, they would throw in these little messages about equality and tolerance. And especially in that era, it was very, very powerful.
Nothing wrong with being a morality play.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Another favorite episode? You got a list of 10
I got a list. There's one called Mixed Doubles, where Samantha has come down with a witch disease, and I have all the witch diseases that everybody came down with in the book.
There are catalogs of things in this book.
Trivia stuff at the end called Within the Continuum. Samantha comes down with, what is it? Oh, wow. Metaphysical molecular disturbance. There we go. And everybody in the mortal world thinks Samantha is Louise Tate, and everybody thinks Louise Tate is Samantha. So, which is kind of different because Samantha wakes up in Larry's bed, for 1971. That's pretty progressive. And so they go along trying to keep Samantha from having to go home with Larry until Dr. Bombay, Bernard Fox, can find a cure. And it's just such a neat disease.
Well, I notice Arthur here has Bombay syndrome.
Yes, an allergy to horse feathers.
My favorite disease in a fictional character is a disease that Sherlock Holmes claimed to have in an episode where he has to pretend he's dying.
Oh, no.
It's called the Black Formosa Corruption. I think
that sounds like a title of a Big Bang Theory episode.
Well, yeah, it kind of does, doesn't it? ADAM-MICHAELL James, it's a wonderful book, and I must confess, it's one of the few books, as thick as it is, that I really read a lot of before I did the interview. I'm from the Larry King School. He would never. I produced his show when he was only on radio. No one knew who he was. his theory was, don't read the book because then you know more than the author. But I read a lot of this. This was great reading at work recently.
Well, I appreciate that.
Where can you find this darn thing?
Well, it's scheduled to come out October 28th. The main flashpoint would be to go to my website, ADAM-MICHAELLJames.com, where I have links to where to buy it. Or
Is there a hyphen in that?
No.
Just ADAM-MICHAELLJames.com.
Just ADAM-MICHAELLJames.com. And yes, there are links not only to where to buy it, but also there's a Facebook group devoted to the book and a blog, Bewitched Continuum at tumblr.com. Wow, I can barely say that.
Now, it's not been out that long, but what's been the reaction?
The reaction has been very good. I mean, the book isn't actually out yet. It's scheduled to come out October 28th. But everybody that I've spoken to, well, the main thing about this whole journey started, I had this idea of doing this because this is the 50th anniversary year of Bewitched. And I had come back to LA for a visit last year, and I was talking to my old boss, Maggie Field, at the screenwriting agency I worked for. And I was like, Maggie, I have this idea. I want to do this book, but I don't know if anybody's going to find it interesting but me. And she said, no, people will love this. And so that was my catalyst for writing it. And as I have gone through the last 5 weeks that I've been here, since I made the announcement about the book and talking about it, every time you mention Bewitched to somebody, a little light goes on. And oh, I love that show, either when I was growing up or there's a lot of the younger, I don't want to say younger kids because that makes me sound like I'm not, but that have been discovering Bewitched brand new, from DVDs or what their parents are passing down to them. So the reaction has always been, wow, that's something I really want to check out.
Don't you love it when you introduce somebody to something? I have a friend who last year I introduced to Charlie Chan. He had never seen any of those old 1930s or 40s, albeit slightly racist now, but just fun movies. And he said, where can I see more of these? So I got you hooked on this now.
Exactly. I mean, the reason that we remember these shows and these movies is because there was a quality to them. Mm-hmm. Not that things today don't have quality. They do. It's just a different sensibility.
Yeah, and I think Bewitched was interesting and contrived in a way, without being hokey.
Right.
And I don't know how they accomplished that, because if other writers had done it, it would have the joke would have worn thin after a while.
It's a very fine line to walk, and of course they did have different writers and different directors, but they did have an overall quality to it, and that's what we remember. I mean, yes, I do pick it apart, but it's always out of respect because I know what they were trying to do. And
I hope I have the name right. William Asher.
Yes.
Lived about 6 blocks from here.
Really?
Most of the time.
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
Everybody, I told a lot of friends of mine, I'm introduced, said, well, talk about William Asher. He was everywhere. You used to run into him at the store. So.
That's great. That's really great. I never got to meet Elizabeth. I would have loved it. The closest I got was I was 14. She had just come out with a movie called Second Sight, where she played a blind woman, and she had this guide dog, named Emma. And I was 14. It was 1984. I wrote some god-awful fan letter. Who knows how cheesy it was. Sent it off to her. A few months later, I get this envelope. Elizabeth Montgomery. Really? It was an autographed picture. Not only personalized to me, but personalized about what I had written about the movie with a little paw print for the dog.
Oh, that's
cute. And I
cute.
Always remembered she didn't have to do that.
No, not at all.
And so
she could have said, send him out a photo.
Yeah, or not even send a photo. Just don't even acknowledge it.
Sure.
And so here she does this. So I always had in my mind, wow, she must have been really awesome. I came back out here to LA for Bewitched Fanfare, which was a celebration by Bewitched fans that started on September 17th, which was the exact 50th anniversary. I was very privileged to be able to make the book announcement that day. But everybody, all the guest stars and everybody that they brought in, whenever they mentioned Elizabeth Montgomery, it was with that same kind of tone that she was that way in life. It wasn't just me getting a picture. That's just how she was.
So many stars are a character on camera that they are not in person. Mm-hmm. And in my career, I have been so disappointed, I won't mention names, of meeting some people who just were the opposite in person of their sweet, lovable character on the screen.
Oh, sure. I run across that, too.
Who's left?
Who is left alive of the main people? Dr. Bombay, Bernard Fox. He appeared at Bewitched Fanfare. He's 87. They had to help him in. Mm-hmm. But he's still very spirited. Aaron Murphy, who played Tabitha. Of course, she was a little girl back then, so she's middle-aged now, but she's still out there acting, and she's luminous. The boys that played Adam, David Block Mandel and Greg Lawrence, are still with us as well. Of course, as you know, back then they always had twins playing the children because of the child labor laws.
Yeah.
So they're still here, and many of the guest stars are still here, and of course some of the actors' children who I got a chance to meet during Fanfare as well.
There is a whole new industry out there of children of famous people.
Mm-hmm.
I did a show 2 years ago with Boris Karloff's daughter.
Oh wow!
Yeah. Sarah Karloff lives about 10 miles from here, and in her front yard is a life-size bronze statue of her dad as Frankenstein.
That's great.
And she says, FedEx and everybody think of me as the woman with the monster in her front yard.
Nice. At least she's always easy to find.
Yeah. Michael, thanks for coming over. This has been a quick hour.
I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much, Dennis.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this interview from my new American Montage series. Check out YouTube for more. I'm Dennis Daly.